Welcome to the Heart Journey podcast. I'm Dr. Barbara Jean Losove, and I am coming to you as a minister who also happens to be a psychologist. Today, we have part two of our talk with Dr. Warren Kinghorn. He is such a hero. I'm truly a fangirl. And we're going to talk about wonder. We're going to talk about healthy relationships. We're going to talk about what does it mean that Jesus heals the broken heart. We're going to talk about surrender. We're going to talk about the solutions, the invitations of anxiety that invite us into wild, beautiful surrender. We're going to talk about walking with our God in a way that brings forth more and more wholeness. We're going to talk about having healthy friendships, healthy environments, and being parts of healthy churches. This is all part of our From Codependence to Christ Dependent series. Enjoy, my friend, Dr. Warren Kinghorn. I love that I'm interviewing you in this podcast series because it's an example of where we want to go to. We want to leave control and codependency, and we want
Yeah,
to move towards that koinonia, that hospitality,
yeah.
that I felt the Holy Spirit there so much. And
Mm,
I'm thinking about one time in one of Dr. McCarty's classes, I
mhm.
raised my hand and I said, "Well, I know this might sound weird, but I had this dream last night, and in this dream, I went to heaven, and this happened, this happened, this." And it really
Cool.
was. I really did have a dream.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure how it would be received, but it felt like
yeah,
it was on topic for what we were talking about. And
yeah,
he said, "Oh, you're a mystic."
yeah,
And he said, "You
yeah,
should read Teresa Varela." And I just
yeah,
felt, wow,
yeah,
it was a real
yeah,
risk for me to share that in an academic environment and
yeah,
to have, the person beside me
yeah,
who's like really kind of exploring Christianity, and then me like, I had a dream and I went to heaven, and
yeah,
that doesn't always happen to me, but I loved the just kind of like that inclusive environment. And it's very different from kind of a like an environment of scarcity, an environment of control.
mm,
So can you talk to us more about why we move toward control rather
yeah,
than a letting go and a loving?
yeah. Well, just your comment about Dr. McCarty's class made me remember so many years ago, I was a medical student and then I
Uh-huh.
took 2 years to do a divinity degree at Duke. So I came from medical school to divinity school and I took church history from a faculty member who's no longer with us. She passed away several years ago, but her name was Susan Keefe, and she was a mystic, and
Uh-huh.
she taught us early church history and the tradition of the mystics.
Uh-huh.
And I heard later that when she would give an exam, she would hand out the exam. This is back in the old days when everything was on paper. Hand out the exam, and she'd leave the room, and she would go either to her office or to the hallway outside. And for the entire exam, she would pray for the students taking the exam. And that was her. That is absolutely who she was. And I thought, okay, this is different from medical school. This is not how
Yes.
the medical system usually works, and maybe different from a lot of divinity school too. But I think there's that way in which like we can think about learning as more than just learning. It's also about like connection with God and with things that are greater than us. And um, I think I talk in my book about this distinction between control and wonder.
Hmm.
Um, and and I think so often our lives are oriented toward gaining and maintaining control.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
and control is an important thing. So you work a lot with survivors of trauma. I work a lot in my clinical practice at the Durham VA with survivors of trauma, and we both know how important it is when people have survived trauma to have like basic control over our bodies and lives and the circumstances around us. And so control is not a bad thing. Trying to help to gain control is, I think, part of what God gives to us. And though, if our lives are are always oriented toward gaining and maintaining control, then a couple of things happen. One is that we get kind of, I don't like the clinical word, but we get a little bit paranoid or a little bit like, too focused maybe on always having to have things under control. It kind of breeds anxiety. Like, am I under control enough or others under control enough? and it kind of turns us in on ourselves, and that can be a problem.
Mhm.
It makes us very vigilant about everything all around in ways that keeps us from feeling free. And the other thing is that, like, if our lives are oriented toward gaining and maintaining control, we're going to give a lot of our own allegiance to whomever or whatever we think has put us in that place of control. And I think that could be that could, in the medical world, that could be a medical authority, it could be a medical technique, it could be a religious authority, it could be a religious system, it could be a political authority or a political leader. And any of that can happen, and I think does happen. And that's pretty much a textbook biblical definition for idolatry.
Yeah.
If if we like seeking control, if we give our allegiance to something that we believe has put us in a place of control that's not God, we risk making it into an idol. So Christian faith calls us to see control as a good, but ultimately to understand that that's not the point of our lives. That again, because we're known and loved by God, because God holds us in His life, because He calls us into this greater vision of what it means to be human, we can move beyond control into this like space of wonder and of love and of praise and of Sabbath rest. And so one thing you've heard me say this in the classes that I teach at Duke, first class session of every class, I'm always saying like, how in our study of theology do we find ourselves not drawn toward keeping everything under control, but drawn toward becoming deeper lovers of God
Oh,
and deeper lovers of the natural creation around us and deeper lovers of others, including those that we might not be able to love very easily, and deeper lovers of ourselves. So how can we grow in love and expand in love? And I think that's a test for us. It's like we're called not to like cinch down on control for its own sake, but to become deeper lovers. And I want that for myself. I want that for my kids. I want that for my patients. I want that for
yes.
all of us.
Yes, yes. Um, oh, I'm so glad I'm talking to you today. Like I said, I think of you often. I feel like I could just
We're
sit and learn with you for years.
Oh, same here. Yeah.
Um, okay, cancel culture. This is another piece that I didn't feel at Duke, and yet I know that people are politically aligned in various ways. But I really want to give the TMC, and then even going to practice in presence, and just
Yeah.
being in your program and going to different events you put on. I hear you talking about how we could use government for good this way or that way. And
Yeah.
yet, I hear intellectual humility, cultural humility, even if there would be such a thing, political humility. In
Right.
fact, politics didn't come up as much as here's what we can do for good.
Yeah.
And there was no rhetoric that I heard.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this because it felt very kingdom and
Mhm.
not cancel. Can you talk to us about that? And um, because we're talking about how whole relationship with myself, with God, with others, which your
Yeah.
book references as well. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me about that and talk to our listeners about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful. Thank you for saying that. I'm grateful that was your experience. And that's what we want to be the experience of folks who come and study with us. But just frankly, it's tough. We live in a world where cancel culture happens on both sides in different ways, various different political and theological binaries. And we tend to kind of seek as human beings, we tend to kind of seek those who agree with us, and there's so much of a tendency in our world and in the church, and maybe especially in modern universities, to kind of cinch down on like the in group and the out group, and to not want to listen to those that are in the out group. Um, I'd say, well, within what we try to do in our theology, medicine, culture work, as you know, students who come and study with us come from a range of different Christian backgrounds. We have Catholic students, we have Protestant students, we have folks that would identify as more politically and theologically conservative, some folks that would identify as more politically, theologically moderate, or even
Mhm.
liberal. And so, what does it mean to find ourselves in a community where we're able to be together? I think one thing is we are committed to a kind of vision of faithfulness to Christian teaching, and and so like that's the goal. It's not like truth doesn't matter. We're not out for like difference of opinion for its own sake. Like we want to contend for truth together, and yet to listen while we're doing that, and to be able to have honest conversations, and to be able to like to do so in a spirit of honest searching together. And one of the things that I've found is that I've learned from students and faculty who have positions that are different from mine. Some of whom are more conservative than I am, some of whom are more liberal than I am in different ways. I found that I've seen people like build relationships with each other in surprising ways. I've seen um, I've seen people change their minds about different things, and like in different ways, like come to a place that they like they kind of begin to appreciate like say a traditional teaching of various ethical things in ways that they hadn't before because they kind of see it exemplified in people's lives. It's been really beautiful, and I think it's getting away. It's like that sense of like we're called to a common work of contending for truth with humility, but with the understanding that like this is important. We need to stick with this together, and that's what we strive to do. And I think that we've seen an era within universities where there's been a lot of there's 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 definitely the external perception, and I think in some cases the internal felt reality of universities become this kind of monolithic culture, and in more conservative universities it may be a more conservative monolithic culture. In universities like Duke, it's perceived as a more progressive or liberal monolithic culture, and the other voices aren't welcome. I'll just say my experience of being in a secular research university has been that there's a lot more internal diversity than I think most people recognize. There's people who believe all sorts of things here and who practice all sorts of things. And there's also, I think, a willingness for people to have different perspectives. And so, I have some faculty colleagues that, you know, and to some, and myself also who are, who've like for years have have been involved in ways that like counter that perception of
Yeah.
kind of monolithic progressive norm, and have found actually that people in the university are willing to hear that and willing to in many cases support that even if they don't agree with it. I think there's more openness inside universities, at least at Duke, and I think also other places that I'm aware of, that than I think often people give credit for.
I did experience that there, and I did experience Jesus at
Yeah,
TMC for sure.
yeah,
All right, so I'm thinking more about kind of related to this anger. Thinking about when I think about anger and anxiety, I think about which a lot of the cancel culture is built on. But
yeah.
I think about anger and anxiety. I think about, in a way, it's related to that sense of control, that things are happening that I don't like. And
Mhm.
one of the books that I read because of TMC was Curtis Chang's work on the anxiety solution.
Anxiety, opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I love this idea of anxiety or anger. He mostly talks
Hmm.
about anxiety, but I think anger is the same, is our invitation
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
surrender. And
Yeah.
so we're talking a lot about anxiety, anger,
Hmm.
and different feeling like a victim, different places we can get on the triangle of pain with codependency.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the power of surrender and how we can surrender, how and what happens when we surrender.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage, again, drawing on Thomas Aquinas, this
Mhm.
medieval Christian thinker that I draw in the book, I would encourage people to think about every emotion has love at its root. And and so Aquinas would have said that, we feel anxious when we actually love someone or something, but we feel that it's threatened.
Hmm.
And and so reframing our anxiety around like what is it that I love that I feel is threatened? And often, I may feel anxious because my daughter is driving home from college, and I think about how busy the interstate highway can be, and but my anxiety, which is a negative feeling, is a kind of reflection of my love for her. And I think a lot of our anxiety has that kind of function that we feel that something is threatened. So being able to kind of turn it around and like, how can we see all of our emotions, including the ones that are negative, as being in some ways reflections of whom and what we love, um, is doesn't always work, and it doesn't always work in part because sometimes the body can just things can just happen in our neuroendocrine systems that we have these bodily reactions that don't make sense. But in many cases, I think we can see we can see emotions in some ways kind of signposts in some ways to whom or what we love. And that helps to put it not just in a place of like, I have these feelings, I just need to get rid of them in whatever way possible, but rather like, what do these feelings have to teach me? And then I think, as with, I mean, Curtis Chang's testimony is so powerful. He's a successful pastor. He still is incredibly successful in what he does, but he just reached the absolute end. And for him, it was, as he narrates, it was this invitation to to actually live out of control, and to give up his pretension of always being in control. And in that really hard experience, he found such freedom. And I think that's the question for us is like when we're facing real challenges, what's the invitation for us? Like what's God's invitation for us? And so sometimes the invitation is going to be just to like get that negative experience under control as fast as possible, but in many cases it's going to be what do I have to learn from this?
Mhm.
And what does this have to teach me? And and I found that in my own life. I've certainly heard that in my lives of my patients. I think it's just something we can ask. I would say though that we need not to valorize psychological suffering as if like everything's always a teachable moment all the time. If somebody is in the pit of depression and unable to get out of bed, or if somebody is like so anxious that they're just unable to engage in the kind of basic things that they need in their lives, then a medication may be exactly what's needed in that moment, or a course of electroconvulsive therapy for severe depression may be exactly what's needed in that moment. So I do think there's sometimes when we just need to kind of do what we can to alleviate suffering and distress. But
Mhm.
even that is to enable then things to happen in the future. So like we want to, help somebody to be able to get out of bed and to be able to start eating so that then they can lean into relationships and lean into therapy and begin to do those kinds of things that they know are life-giving. Um, Medication and other things like that are never like the sole solution. They're never like the only thing that's needed to in almost every case.
Beautiful. Uh, J Jesus is the healer of the brokenhearted. It's the way that I think about him. And I'm in Luke 4, he referenced Isaiah 61. And when I look at the Hebrew word, I forget which actual word is there, but I do remember the definition for brokenhearted. It
Yeah.
talks about basically trauma. It talks about if a heart that's been mauled, shattered. I mean, it's really graphic. Mauled is pretty graphic. And
Mm-hmm.
so he heals our trauma.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Walking that out, because you and I have walked this out with so many people.
Yeah.
And I think so there's science that heals
Mm-hmm.
trauma, that helps heal trauma. And then there's Jesus. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the science is like God's common grace.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I could go to AA, get sober, literally be delivered from alcoholism
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of dark oppression of that and
Yeah.
never become a Christian.
Yeah.
Similarly, I can receive trauma healing from science and never
Yeah.
know Jesus. But can you talk to us about how you understand Jesus as the healer of the brokenhearted and of trauma, of a shattered heart?
Yeah. Well, I
Mhm.
might I might reframe what you just said a little bit. I don't think that
Sure.
science heals trauma. I think science is a way of knowing. It's a way that we can
Mhm.
gain certain kinds of wisdom. But what is it heals trauma? Well, I mean, there's different kinds of trauma, but the root of a lot of it is that the world at one point has been profoundly uncontrollable, dangerous, and it's like broken our capacity to trust
Mhm.
ourselves and others. And so those who are listening and those in our world who are trauma survivors like are constantly wondering like, can I trust myself? Can I trust the world? Can I trust God? Can I trust the church? Can I trust any of this?
Yeah.
So what heals trauma? Well, it's like it's relationships that give us the kind of glimmer of hope that we might be able to trust and love again. And and so we can find that. You mentioned common grace. I think that's right. Like
Mhm.
healthy relationships of any sort, even like, you know, kind of innocuous ones can just be a little bit of breath of common grace to be able to help us to love and trust again. And in some cases, when people are really struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder or other things, then like structured trauma-focused therapy that, helps people to feel safe and within that safety of relationship to really be able to open themselves to some of those experiences and find that they can find healing and growth. That's common grace. That's what's given to us. Um, but as I said, as we talked about at the very beginning, like, who and people come from lots of different traditions. I think other people from other religious traditions would have ways of naming this. But as a Christian, like where is it that we find ourselves perfectly known and loved in ways that that honors and respects the goodness of us as creatures and the dignity and the worth that we really have. Like, where do we find that? And it's again, like in the life of God, before God, like understanding ourselves, recognizing ourselves as deeply known and loved by God and invited by the Spirit into the life of the Son of God so that we can then look at the Father and say, Abba. Like that's our deepest place of security. And and so in some ways, like all healing of any sort, in some ways is kind of a gesture toward that like deepest being known, that deepest fullness of the presence of God and being fully known and seen by God and fully knowing and seeing God. That's what our hearts are longing for. And all the good work you do and I do as a psychologist and psychiatrist is a kind of a foretaste of that. It's kind of a practice of that. So that's how I would see it. And therefore, like, good therapy, like good trauma focused therapy is good therapy. And it's participating in that common grace that helps us to be and to find ourselves able to love and trust again. But if that's where we end up, it's never going to be fully satisfying. Like we find ourselves continually drawn on towards something that's higher and greater than we are. And Christians would affirm, at least I would affirm, that that's fully found in the life of God.
Yes. Yes. And but the research shows that our brains are made for God. We just had Harold Koenig on the show, and we were
Yeah.
talking about some of Andrew Nurberg's work about how our brain is wired for God. And
Mhm.
even thinking about meditating on God, praying really changes our brain and helps it to flourish. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
amazing.
interesting. All the work that's come out recently on like Ian McGilchrist's work on hemispheric laterality, where he says, our culture so focuses on left brain ways of taking up with the world, like, this like, picking things apart, getting the answers right. But actually, almost everything that we value as human beings, love and music and beauty and tenor and relationship and emotion is like mediated by the right brain, and yet it's like hard to name that. Now, I think that is a way in which like, we recognize that what it means to be human is more than just information. It's more than just like control, but it's like opening ourselves to a reality and a beauty that's greater than we are. And for Christians, again, different people have different ways of interpreting that. But for Christians, we'd say that all is pointing us to the majesty and grandeur and beauty of God's life.
Yeah.
It's a way in which like we as human beings are like find ourselves opening to that.
Yes. Yeah. As we close, I want to hear if there's anything left on the table that you'd like to share. And I'd also love to hear how God has changed your life.
Yeah. Well, I think I think relative to what we've been talking about, I had a lot of learning to do and a lot of growing to do, even in my young adulthood. Like I was very, just what I was just saying, I was very left brain focused. I still
Yeah.
am in some ways. I was really good at, picking up information and performing well, but but I wasn't really able to really know what it meant to love and to be loved, and my like even when I was a college student and a medical student, and and I found that a number of things began to move in my heart, but part of that was honestly moving toward marriage and then marrying my wife, and like we I think became means of grace to each other, and it was not through like my study of psychiatry, but it was through like learning to trust and to be open and to give myself and to be fully known and loved in a relationship that I began to also
Mm.
understand something of who I was before God. So I think so much of what like has happened in my life has kind of happened just as like grace that's kind of come along the way. And I'm just so grateful for that. And I'm still learning and I'm still finding ways that like I'm challenged by you and by uh, the amazing folks who I'm surrounded with at Duke and at the VA and in our church. And so I'm just finding that like now I'm in middle age and I'm like, there's so much more that I have to learn. And there's so much like this like the space of wonder, at my best, like that's where I want to be. So I think I've found that I'm just on a journey in that way. And I think along with that, you asked if anything was left on the table. I think one of the key things I'd like to encourage those who are listening to do is to think about the words that we use for ourselves. So
Mm.
often in our world, we use like mechanical, industrial images for ourselves. We talk about recharging, we talk about refueling, we talk about burnout. Like what burns out, like rockets burn out and engines burn out. And if we use like mechanical, we talk about, like, you know, getting a way to recharge, all these things. So I think if we can get away from mechanical images for ourselves and replace them with like creaturely images, like
Mm.
because we're not machines, but we're creatures and we grow weary and we need rest and we need nurture and we need nourishment and we need friendship and we need encouragement. And using that kind of language for ourselves, I think helps us to put us on the right track. And I've tried to do that for myself, and I sometimes fail.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Warren Kinghorn, for being here with us and graciously giving us this hour of your time. I know your time is so precious. It means the world to me. So thank you so much for being with us. And
Same,
yeah.
same in reverse. Thank you, Dr. Barbara. I'm so honored to be here and so grateful to you for your work in ministry.
Ooh, that was so good. I loved it when he's like, there's something else on the table. Thank you again, Dr. Warren Kinghorn, and thank you for listening. I know your life is being changed. I would love to hear about how the Heart Journey podcast is helping your heart to heal. You can email me at Dr. Barbara Ministries or Dr. Barbara at drbarbaministries.org. Also, make sure you're following us on YouTube, TikTok, all the places where podcasts are shown, on Facebook, on Instagram. We love you and we do this for you. We have some free resources for you this quarter. I would love for you to work on your self-parenting with Jesus. Dr. Kinghorn talked about healing your relationship with yourself. Go to drbarbaministries.org/self-parent and get our free tool. It's for you. We do this because we love you. Remember, we're podcasting 3 times a week. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Flashback Fridays, where we're serving up some relevant old content in some new ways. So next week, I'll see you this week and next week. Remember, we have Tuesdays, we give a podcast with a guest. On Thursdays, I do a solo podcast. Right now, we're talking about From Codependence to Christ Dependence. And then we have Flashback Fridays. I love you, and I will see you in all these places.